of the items on the list was grocery shopping, so I zipped into the store, grabbed my cart, up and down the aisles, stood very impatiently at the checkout counter. You're always in the slowest line, it seems, when you're in a hurry. Picked up my grocery bags and was heading out the door, and I heard a man's voice. And he said, "Ma'am, could you give me a ride? I don't live very far from here, and I'll pay you $1." But the first thought that went through my mind was, he's a stranger, don't listen to him, keep on going. There's trouble out there. You know how we hear that all the time. But then I looked at this old man. He was sitting in a chair right there near the exit or the entrance to the store. He had a cane beside him and his grocery bag on the floor. And his clothes hadn't been new for a long, long time. Maybe never new to him. Maybe Salvation Army, which reminded me of my dad. My dad was born in 1900 and was raising his 4 daughters, my 4 older sisters, during the Depression when things were really tough. And Dad would go to the Salvation Army and buy his shirts. And years later, when he could well afford to wear brand new shirts, he'd still go in and say, "You know, I got this shirt for $1. It's plenty good enough for every day." And when my dad was 72 years old and died, he was still wearing his 25-cent Salvation Army shirts, even though he had brand new ones in the drawer that we had given to him for Father's Day and Christmas and his birthday. My father died of cancer, and he had about 9 months maybe from the time we first knew until the time that he died. And even though we watched him go from 165 pounds down to 80 pounds, there was a strength in him that never left him, even until the last few moments of his life. Well, I looked at that old man, and it was like, whoa, he was just like Dad. So when he asked me again, "Ma'am, could you give me a ride? I don't live very far from here, and I'll pay you $1." This time I said yes. And he picked up his grocery bag and he picked up his cane. And very slowly and cautiously we made it out into that icy parking lot. We were getting fairly close to my car, and a man, Lloyd Herfindahl is his name, an artist in Elberly, came over to us and he handed the old man a book. And he said, "Here, I'd like you to have this." And that was all he said. The man said, "Thank you," and Lloyd went back to his car. And the old man looked at me and asked me, and I described a little bit of what I knew about the artist, about Lloyd Herfindahl and his newly published book. Well, by this time we were at my car, and he got in on the passenger side, putting the cane in between us, and putting his grocery bag on the floor and his book on the dash. And when I got in, he said, "Do I have to buckle my seatbelt?" And I said, "I'd feel better if you did." So he did. And then he said, "This is a pretty nice car." And my thought was, I wonder what kind of cars you're used to riding in. But I said, "I like my car too, but I'll like it better when it's paid for." And he said, "They're always better when they're paid for." I backed out of the parking stall and drove out of the lot, and we went by the Catholic church, and there's a huge dumpster sitting out in front of the church. And he asked me if I knew what was going on there, and I described a little bit of what I knew about the restoration they were doing and some of their dreams for what that church could be, the beautiful, elegant church it had been at one time. And then he said, "Are you Catholic?" And I said, "No, I'm a Methodist." And his response was, "Well, that's a pretty good church." And I said, "I think so. What church do you belong to?" And he said, "I watch television on Sunday mornings." And I said, "That's a pretty good church too." And he said, "Yes, it is." Then he asked me if I was a school teacher, and I told him about my position at the Historical Museum, and he thought that sounded like a pretty wonderful place to work. And I said, "It is most of the time. Most of the time." Well, he was directing me, turn left here or turn right here. And eventually we went down a 4-lane highway, turned around, and came back up and into an alley beside a great big old White House that had been divided into apartments. And when he told me to park the car, because of all the hard-packed next snow and the ice that was right there. The car was at a bit of an angle, and he was sitting on the higher part of that angle. He reached over to open the door, and he didn't have the strength to open it. Now the car was a two-door, and the doors were really long and really heavy, and against gravity, it just didn't push open. And he pushed one more time, and nothing happened. And I was so tempted to reach across him and just give it a good shove. And I thought, no, there was just something about him. Remember, I talked about the strength in the eyes of an old man. There was something about him that just wait. So he picked up that cane. It had a big white rubber tip on the bottom, and he put that rubber tip against the inside of the car door. And then holding it like this, he pushed. And the door opened about 3 inches. And then he moved his hands further up on the cane, and he pushed again, and you could just see how hard he was trying. And the door opened all the way. And it kind of bobbed a bit, and then it stopped. And it stayed open. He reached into his pocket. He said, I said I'd pay you $1. And I said, oh no, you don't need to do that. Stupid me. Not thinking he needs to do this. And his response was, I said I'd pay you. And I said, oh no, you really don't. Let this be my gift. And he said then, all right, if that's the way you want it. And this pleasant, wonderful conversation that we had, I blew it. I just totally destroyed that wonderful relationship that we had developed. I felt so bad. I said, here, let me help you. And I reached for his book, and I was going to put it in his grocery bag. And he said, no, don't do that. And this time he sounded angry with me, and I was feeling like I just totally, I'm so upset. Instead, he opened up his bag, and there weren't groceries in there. There were silk flowers, and the first one I saw was a daisy. And he said, I sell flowers. And my thought was, who would want to buy one of those scroungy-looking flowers? But what he did was reach into that bag, and he pulled out a red silk rose with tiny plastic dewdrops on it. And he handed it to me, and he said, I'd like you to have this.